Hello, everyone. My name is Greta Lundgaard, and let's learn a bit about how to use the STARTALK Principles infographics in professional development sessions or teacher programs. Here is the learning target for this video, so take a moment and read it. We're going to explore how infographics can be used to capture attention and interest, develop a deeper understanding of the material, organize and analyze information, and enhance retention and recall of information. Let's start with defining an infographic. An infographic is a document that uses multiple representations or multimodal text to make complex ideas and information and represent them in a visual format that's clearly and quickly understood. In a digital world, it's imperative that teacher candidates develop digital literacy skills. Digital literacy is defined as not just being able to use digital tools, but also to adapt to their use in particular circumstances and specific situations to meet the needs of the user. Digital literacies, including creation, construction, embedding culture, and cognition, have been emphasized as central 21st century skills to be developed by students in the classroom. Teachers now and in the future should plan to use multimodal instruction to model digital literacy skills themselves, to allow students the opportunity to interact with and experience successful learning opportunities using digital literacy. This interaction will foster development of these digital literacy skills by both instructors and students, and add to critical skill development in students as they infer, analyze, connect with, and interact with these kinds of documents. Why use infographics in professional development? Besides developing critical thinking and digital literacy, infographics can bridge gaps in the current system of learning for students who identify with multiple learning preferences. They bring together multiple modalities in hopes that a wider audience, regardless of their propensities for learning, will understand them. Infographics use text and illustrations or images to inspire readers to retain information being presented better. And it's important to note still that regardless of the way students prefer to learn, infographics act to encourage general visual literacy skill development amongst all learners. Let's look at the STARTALK Principles infographics. Here is the URL if you need it. And we're going to do our overview in 2 steps. The first step will illustrate specific ways infographics work in learning. The second step is to connect that specific use to a sample activity that would fit into the acquire, process, apply, or reflect sequence that STARTALK suggests for learning episodes in teacher programs or in teacher professional learning experiences. So how do they work in learning? Infographics show connections between key ideas that enable learners to begin building understanding at a glance. This is probably the use of infographics that folks are most familiar with. They can be ideal for introducing the basics of complicated processes or breaking down high-level information into manageable bites, of connecting different pieces of information to one core guiding question or guiding principle. These work for all types of audiences and all learners. Infographics can be incredibly effective educational tools thanks to their ability to break complex information into easy to understand components and to make even dense data engaging. So infographics are visual representations of information in a graphic format, and they are designed to make information easier to understand. So this is a piece of a infographic from the LearnerCentered Learning STARTALK principle. And in this instance, it's an illustration of the gradual release of responsibility framework, which is a nice way to organize instruction, but it's also a complex process with many moving parts and many steps. This mix of visual, graphics, organizational structure, and text breaks down the GRR into easy to understand components. I see 4 steps immediately because I see 4 blocks. I see catchy titles, and these titles actually do explain what the step involves. I see visuals that give me a clue as to the role of the teacher and student, and the text gives me just enough information about what the teachers and the students will do that I want to know a little bit more. Another way infographics work in learning is they help me understand complex ideas or information, and they can simplify concepts. So let's see how that works. Here is a snip from the Integrating Culture, Content, and Language infographic. For sure, a complex idea. By looking at this one section of the infographic, something immediately stands out that can give me a foundation to stand on, a crowbar that I can use to leverage more understanding of this complex idea. Yes, right in the center, I see a very bold, colorful design, a geometric shape, and it's surrounding the words purposeful communication. So the foundation, I get it. I see the big idea. Purposeful communication is the goal. I even see a definition of communication to solidify my understanding, just to make sure I have it right. But then when I go back to this visual in the center of this piece, the colors and the shape of the figures surrounding the words purposeful communication begin to shed light on how culture, content, and language work together within communication. I have an entry point now into this complex idea, and hopefully my instructors will use that entry point, purposeful communication, to help me gain a deeper understanding of this idea and how to apply it in the classroom. If there ever was a concept that needed simplifying, it's how to make authentic resources more comprehensible. This snip is from the Using and Adapting Authentic Text infographic, and it combines text and graphics into a powerful learning tool. It delivers a large amount of information in a format that is simple, clean, and concise. I admit I have an up and down relationship with this advice. Edit the task, not the text. It's easy to see this advice as an easier said than done statement. And at times it can create or could create a bit of defensiveness in its very simplicity. However, these 3 visuals shine a spotlight on this idea, this advice, and I can begin to see how a resource can be used in different ways at different levels of proficiency. Well, first of all, I can establish different purposes. It's the same resource, but there are different things that students are going to do with them. I'm going to establish a different purpose depending on the proficiency of my learners. I can ask my learners to focus on different aspects of this resource. Not everybody has to read and understand all of it, depending on what I want them to do, what the purpose is. So I can make sure that I can connect in step 3. I can connect the resource to age and proficiency level appropriate prior knowledge, to age and proficiency level appropriate performance tasks. So basically, when I see edit the task, not the text, from this point on, I'm going to think 1, establish purpose, 2, create focus, and 3, make sure that I establish relevance of this resource to the learners that I'm teaching. I feel so much better about this whole idea of using authentic resources now. And the last thing that we're going to discuss about infographics and what they bring to learning is how they make information more approachable. And sometimes I like to see approachability as finding a place for learners or my students to personally connect to the information on the infographic. A place I can relate or connect to myself, to someone else, to a teacher I've seen teach, to someone else's experience or memory. This snip comes from the infographic on target language and comprehensible input. By this point, almost everyone is aware of the importance of teaching in the target language and the importance of comprehensible input. This visual uses imagery and color to highlight and enhance text-based information about comprehensible input. It makes a firm statement about incomprehensible input as compared to existing language capability, and it provides 3 very powerful and succinct tips critical for all teachers to know about developing comprehensible input, all without using the words target language, really keeping the focus on the main issues. I think we're ready now for this second step, where we're going to connect that specific use to a sample activity that would fit into the acquire, process, apply, or reflect sequence that STARTALK suggests for learning episodes in teacher professional learning experiences. So let's start. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to brainstorm professional development activities that we could use when working with these infographics. So let's start with the at a glance. So this was the example we used for how to just give an overview of a topic with learners before they dug into any other text information or deep learning about it. We're going to introduce something. So this might be creating interest. Use an infographic to convey the basis rather than having them read a textbook passage or a news article first. Use an infographic to start a discussion. And I'm going to encourage students to just look at the surface level of this infographic before we can go deeper. So, for example, here's what I would ask my learners to do before they did anything else about conducting performance-based assessments. Examine this infographic, and based on what you see and read, what are 3 conclusions you can draw about performance-based assessments? So this would be strictly an acquire activity, but how I would begin to add processing to it, if we just stayed right here, it would be acquire. Students would, learners, teachers would do this individually, but I'm going to ask them to process just a bit with it at this superficial level. So once students complete these 3 steps, I would put them in a group of 3 or a group of 4, ask them to share the 3 conclusions they drew, and decide on 3 conclusions as a group. So maybe 3 of the 4 had 2 conclusions similarly, but their 3rd conclusion, everyone had a different one. So I would ask them to come to agreement. Which one do you think is the most valid or the most important? So a little bit of processing, they've got to talk about things a little bit, but again, it's still just based on what they read in the infographic. If I wanted to extend this even further, I would have that group of 3 connect with another group of 3. Now I've got a group of 6, or I could have each group of 3 call out the 3 that they decided on, put them all up on the board, and we as a group, as a large group, could decide. We could rank them in order. We could do loads of things with this. So this would go from acquire to a little bit of process, but not deep learning, because they're only processing what they read on this infographic. We haven't even gone any farther. So this would be my building background knowledge step before I added more information that then I would require them to process more deeply with. Okay, remember this piece of the learner-centered learning infographic. This one illustrated to make a topic easy to understand, So we talked about why this is easy to understand. So what would I do with this? Here's a suggestion. Again, starting with individual work, examine this part of the infographic, read, and then the next step, after they examine this part of the infographic, the instructor, would collect or have collected maybe 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 short descriptions of typical classroom activities. And I would ask them to look at this piece of the infographic, look at the list of classroom activities I've given you, and reflect on these phases of the GRR and label each activity based on your opinion. So again, done individually. Again, this is acquire, because they are required to read the text now, not just look at the pictures, because now I put them in a group of 3 or 4, and I ask them to defend their choice based on the infographic. So again, now we've got some processing. I've got others to discuss with. They agree with me, they don't agree. I've got to defend my choice. I would ask them to make changes in their choices based on what they come to an agreement with their group. So this would be getting them ready, maybe then, to apply the GRR to a learning plan based on a specific topic. But this would definitely be acquire and process. All right, here's this one about making a complex concept or more simple, to simplify a concept. So what would I do with this one? Again, this is a very complex topic, so I think I'm going to stick with acquire here, because I think everybody needs a little bit more information before they move on. So I'd ask my students or my teacher participants to examine this part of the infographic, discuss it with their group, and then just answer this question. Based on what you read, people might have prior knowledge that they could use. So then we would have their answers as the starting point, the springboard into a deeper discussion. And I, as the instructor, might get them to process deeply now by giving them an article and asking them to find information in the article that supports their opinion about what the most important thing a teacher should understand about using authentic resources effectively. So again, this would be an acquire to set them up. They'd have discussion, they'd have some background knowledge, they would feel some comfort because they had discussed this with colleagues, not with the teacher. And again, we're keeping the learning very, very learner-centered here, as you could see as we all went through. And by the way, on this one, I wanted to make sure everybody saw that we actually, in this activity that I would do, we did an I do, we do guided, and you do together piece. So I actually modeled the gradual release of responsibility framework in what the teachers did with this task. So don't forget that modeling is always an important thing to do. Okay, here is this one about this very complex topic, which is integrating culture, content, and language. What professional development activity would I use with this one? Again, examine this part of the infographic individually. Always had them read on their own first so they can take their time to make meaning, discuss with their group. And this one, I think, is getting close to a acquire, process, and then pieces of an apply. It's not applying the skill of culture, content, and language, but it's applying understanding of what this concept is. So here's my steps. Examine this part, discuss with your group, that's acquire. And then processing, how would you explain culture, content, and language in learning experiences to a colleague? Design your own infographic, breaking down the process described here. Discussion is the process, examine is the acquire, and then designing their own infographic, breaking down just this piece of the big infographic in order to teach someone else, that would be an apply task, a baby apply task. This would be a great thing to do is in a gallery walk. I've got a group of 4, a group of 3. We design our own infographic just based on this piece. Now we're up. Now students can reflect and give feedback on what they see. So the whole sequence of learning could end up to meet all 4 steps with a reflection. I could ask them then take that feedback, go back and look at your infographic you designed. What would you do differently? So we could do a lot with this. Then this was the strategy of connecting to make that infographics purpose is to make learning approachable. So this one, I think I really was happy because when I came to this one, because I think I could just turn this totally into a reflection. Just looking at this part of the infographic, maybe we have already done some processing, some acquire on comprehensible input. Maybe we've looked at some samples, we've seen people do it. I would ask them basically to reflect on where they are in this process. And based on what you see, based on the visual and based on the tips, what's my next step? What is it that I need to focus on? So I would do this before I do that ultimate application, presenting a lesson in the I do phase of the GRR and making sure my input is comprehensible. So I could use it for other things, but the thing that just popped out for me with this one is that this is really a reflection task. It's a great visual, a great way to gauge and personalize it for my own self. What's my next step? What do I need to focus on? So basically, how do I apply? How do I use these infographics? I'm going to encourage you to apply the principles of backwards design when you think about how to use these infographics in professional development sessions or with teachers in teacher programs. So we're going to apply those principles of backwards design. First of all, what's the goal of this professional development session or this phase of my teacher program? What do I want them to do with what they learn? And then what learning experiences cause the teachers to acquire, process, apply, and then reflect on this new information? I hope you have enjoyed this session, this little video summarizing how to use the infographics in teacher professional development sessions or teacher programs. I hope it spurred you to some insights and ideas, aha moments of your own. And thank you so much for watching and being here with me today.